Welcome back, everyone. Middays on SuperTalk Mississippi. Gerard and Rhino in the studio. Joining us now, Senator Roger Wicker. Good afternoon, Senator. Thanks for being here.
Gerard, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. So it is, I think, somewhat well known, sir, that you were actually present in the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. And I think I have this right. You found out after you left the Pentagon, a meeting you were involved in there, what had happened. Is that true?
Donald Rumsfeld invited about 12 or 15 Republican sort of rank-and-file members to breakfast. And the breakfast, unlike down here in Mississippi, the breakfast started at 8 o'clock and went to 9. So what we learned later is that 20 minutes till 9, the first plane went into the World Trade Center.
Right.
And we did not know that in the room. At about 4 minutes after 9, as I was leaving, I passed a guard on the way out of the Pentagon. And he said, I just heard a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And then a moment or two later, a colleague of mine walked up and said it was a double hit. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I got in my car to drive across the bridge into the District of Columbia, and I knew there was a terrorist attack in New York City. Mm-hmm. But little did I know that there was a terrorist attack imminent in Washington, D.C. So at 37 minutes after 9, that plane crashed into the Pentagon. And then we know that a plane was headed toward either the White House or the Capitol. Yeah. And the brave passengers took it down. I've said before, if the pilot had known where the most important person was in the Pentagon, that being the Secretary of Defense, he would have crashed that plane into the riverside, which is where we were. So later on, after I started processing it, and I think every American went through that processing period, I realized how much danger we had been in. And I think I mentioned, maybe I mentioned in my column, which comes out today, that we talked about the necessity of a strong defense and how a lot of Americans didn't appreciate that. And Donald Rumsfeld said, who knows, it may take an event to wake Americans up. He said that during that hour when, in fact, an event was unfolding. I mean, prophetic. We did not know about that. Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah. I went to Capitol Hill. Of course, as I said, just after 9:30, the crash occurred in the Pentagon, and so I was walking from one building to the next, from the Longworth to the Cannon, if you're familiar with Capitol Hill, and I saw people out in the street looking toward the Pentagon, and I saw the smoke. And that's when I walked into my office and said, go home. Everybody go home.
Wow.
And then we pretty much vacated Capitol Hill because we very easily could have been a target, and in fact were a target. And it was not till that afternoon late the police called all the members back in for a briefing. And then, as you recall, we gathered on the steps of the Capitol, and someone just in the crowd, some rank-and-file member started singing "God Bless America," and we all joined in.
Well, what was it like? I know you were serving in the House at the time. When you guys went back into session, how long after the event did that occur when you reconvened, and then what was that like?
Well, we knew that things had changed. Yeah, that had profoundly changed. And I don't guess we could have envisioned exactly everything, but we knew we were going to war. Yeah. And you know, in a way, it was fortunate that there weren't 30,000 people in the World Trade Center that day. That's how many people typically work there in the two buildings. But it was an election day in New York. There had been a traffic jam in one of the tunnels. And the terrorist, again, it was people were still getting to work at 8:40 and 9:04, And so it could have been. We thought we had lost 30,000 Americans, but we knew. And I remember talking to Congressman Pickering that day, and he said, when somebody's killed 30,000 Americans, you go to war. So luckily, it was more like 3,000. Tragic beyond all means, but we knew we were going to war. And so I guess the first time we were back is when President Bush asked to speak to a joint meeting of Congress, and we all joined in together there. And that's we probably were not allowed to go back into session for a day or two, and then we couldn't get home because
we're flying airplanes.
That's right. The airliners weren't working, and if you think about it, the terrorists grabbed airliners and turned them into cruise missiles.
Yeah.
And for all we knew, we were going to have attacks on stadiums. We canceled the ball games for a couple of weeks, and I think we read this week that it happened that the Mississippi State ball game on a Thursday was the first college football game since then, and President Bush wanted to get America going again. He called the athletic directors and said, "I want football on Thursday. Let's send that statement that we're going to get back to business." And the two athletic directors agreed to do that. But there are just so many memories, there was. As a matter of fact, the person renting my basement then was Steve Seal, a former state senator and friend of mine, college friend of mine.
Yep.
We had both gotten back to our little apartment in Virginia, and we were sitting there learning that Barbara Olson, a friend of Steve's, had been in the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She was married to a very prominent attorney, a constitutional lawyer. I think his name is Ted Olson. And she had stayed the night before to have birthday dinner with her husband and postponed her trip to that morning. And, as fate would have it, she was on that plane and was able to call him from the plane. I didn't know you could make a cell call.
Yeah, they had the in-flight phones, if you remember, that would sort of pop out of the headrest and the seat in front of you, and it was extremely expensive, but that was about the only form we had. But that's
so I just have all of those memories there. But there was certainly a resolve, and some people remember it differently. But in terms of deciding to go to war against Al Qaeda and against the Taliban. In Afghanistan, it was unanimous in the U.S. Senate, and there was one dissenting vote in the House of Representatives. That was Barbara Lee, very liberal Democrat from California. She was the only Democrat, the only member who voted no. Now, a lot of our Democratic colleagues remember it differently, but we went to war unanimously. And had several opportunities to take out Osama bin Laden. Thank you for playing Have You Forgotten before the break.
Thank you, Rhino. Yes, Yep, he's done a great job, Rhino, today at selecting the music. But what did it feel like, at least for a brief period of time, again, you serving in the House at that point, that the parties were a little bit more unified? It doesn't seem like they're unified on anything these days.
No question about it. No question about it. Our homeland had been attacked. And if you think about it, this really hadn't happened since the War of 1812. We had been in two major wars, World War I and World War II, most of them Pacific and European, but our homeland had not been attacked. Maybe a little skirmish, and obviously Hawaii was the Pearl Harbor attack, but the continental United States had not had an attack in over a century. So yes, we were unified, and the world was behind us. Different. The headlines in London and Paris, everybody was an American for a time there.
We got a break right here. Can you hang around with us?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
We got Senator Roger Wicker in the studio with us. Stay with us here on Midday. We are back on Middays. Gerard and Rhino in the studio on this
Friday, y'all.
Senator Roger Wicker is our guest in the studio. So, Senator, you and I were just talking offline about the many conflicts that come out of the White House in messaging, and mandatory vaccines is one that we played the clip earlier in December. He said no, he doesn't support mandatory vaccines, and then yesterday, what does he do? Issues executive orders to mandate vaccines in the federal government and even to a great extent in the private sector. And then kind of waffled on the whole handling of Afghanistan as well, the way that was handled. But now it's trying to turn our attention to other things and just kind of abandon that issue. I don't think that those images are going out of the heads of Americans anytime soon. What's your thoughts there?
I don't think so. And, yes, the mainstream media is doing everything they can to help President Biden change the subject.
Yeah.
Today's a Friday. Most people aren't at the office on Saturday. I'm guessing a lot of constitutional attorneys were up late last night and working feverishly today, because that ought to be challenged. What the president decided to do to private businesses that have employees of 100 or more around the nation, and I think, as you mentioned in the previous hour, he's going to apply it to private businesses who get a private paycheck, but not to the Postal Service, who are certainly quasi-federal employees, and they certainly get a check from the federal government. It's just amazing. I think it'll be challenged. And, I'll be disappointed if we don't have some temporary restraining orders by this afternoon or early next week. This ought to be looked at quickly by the United States Supreme Court. And I also, we were talking offline, we've ceded way too much power to the executive branch, to presidents, to do things. And on one thing, a couple of months ago, President Biden even said, this is probably unconstitutional. I probably can't do it, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And, of course, he was right. The court ruled against him, but he had done it for I think it was the moratorium.
Yeah, the eviction moratorium.
Evictions.
Yeah, there's probably won't last.
He said, I know I really can't do this legally. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it anyway.
And sort of arrogantly, I think, quit, well, I can buy some time because it'll take some time for this to go through the legal process. But they may gin up a TRO pretty quick here, though.
The switcheroo he did on not leaving Americans and our special immigrant visas, our interpreters, our drivers, people who have been our friends who we relied on for our lives for 20 years. The switcheroo he did on that within just a few days was breathtaking.
Yeah.
I mean, he sat down with his favorite reporter on ABC News, easy questions, and still he couldn't get it right. He said, we're not going to leave. This August 31st deadline, it is dependent on us getting our folks out. And we know there are hundreds of Americans that were left. And I can tell you all of our offices, Cindy Hyde-Smith's office, mine, and all four of our congressional members and people all across the country have been working just to get a few more out. But there's a group of 23 missionaries. I was on the phone to the Situation Room yesterday about them. I don't know if they've gotten out yet, but they were certainly left behind, not allowed to get through the gate at the Kabul airport. But when a president says he's going to take care of Americans and then 5 days later changes his mind, you wonder what heads of state around the world, what our allies are going to believe when a president looks them in the eye and says, I'm going to do a certain thing that you've asked me to do, and they see the history there.
Well, you've got
the way we abandoned, pardon me, but the way we abandoned the Afghan military was stunning. They had been fighting their war. My son was over there in 2014, and that's about when we started turning over the combat to the Afghan army. What we did was we supplied intel, which is what our son did, and we did close air support. They had never fought without close air support from America. But somehow we took our contractors out the first week. The first week that the president announced this, American contractors had to leave. And then when they started coming in on Afghanistan, they started looking for the close air support. It wasn't there.
Yeah.
And we left the Bagram Air Base under the orders of this Commander-in-Chief, Joe Biden. Under cover of darkness, the Afghans woke up in the morning and the Americans were gone. And that is a shameful thing for a president of the United States to do.
I'm no military strategist, but it sure does seem like that having that air base asset available would have benefited us in trying to get all the Americans out before we left the place.
Well, we have a hearing next week, and I'm the second-ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee. You can be sure we're going to ask about how that decision was made to send the contractors home immediately. You can't run a war without the supplies and the things that contractors bring you, and to abandon that Air Force base at all.
Right.
But particularly to do it as a surprise to people who've depended on us and who we've depended on for 20 years is just shameful.
Yeah. It really is mind-boggling, but now they're working overtime, it seems like, to try to draw attention away from it. And yesterday, remarks coming out of the White House, the description was that the Taliban are cooperating, they're acting professionally and businesslike, but yet we've seen images of journalists who are being beaten. I mean, it's just they're grotesque, honestly. They're horrendous.
And then if we look closely enough, Afghans that sided with us being mowed down by machine guns. People are being killed, and not only did we lose troops, but which had not happened since February of 2020, but also just average citizens there who play music and who want to send girls to school and things like that.
Unbelievable.
This is indeed not a modern day inclusive Taliban. It's just stunning. The things you start hearing from the State Department and from the National Security Advisor.
But they're described as businesslike. Using machine guns to mow down innocent people is hardly something you would describe as businesslike.
Of course, if you want them to open the airport, please let this plane out. You got to ask them for permission. But it is an awful situation that we've allowed ourselves, that our administration, this administration and this presidency have allowed the United States to be placed in.
Well, I wish you and your colleagues well in trying to drill down to the bottom of this deal with folks in the State Department and the top brass in the military, especially General Milley, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who I've been less than pleased with, to say the honest truth. We've given him the business here on the show with his seemingly focus on everything but winning wars and securing the nation, but a lot of social justice stuff. I wanted to pivot just a minute, if it's okay, Senator, about the legislation and the bills that are making their way through the Congress. In particular, we're about to run out of money. We got another debt ceiling situation coming up, and Janet Yellen is warning if we don't address that we can't pay our bills. That's a problem. We got this $3.5 trillion bill, which is really, with the accounting gimmicks taken out, more like $5.5 trillion.
Right. I've been saying 4.2, but when you get over 4, it's an enormous amount of money. Okay, on the debt ceiling, not one single Republican will vote to increase the debt ceiling.
Okay,
that debt is as a result of this stimulus bill that the Democrats rammed through under reconciliation, this fancy title reconciliation, early this year. We were coming out of the recession. Jobs were being created. They decided we need another stimulus bill. So that's their debt. And if the debt ceiling is increased, there will not be one single Republican to vote for that, nor will there be a single Republican, at least in the Senate, that will vote for the new tax and spend bill, which is really a lot of social spending,
that's good to
welfare. So that said, I think we have to, it's 50-50, and if all the Democrats vote yes and all the Republicans vote no, then the vice president breaks the tie. So I think we need to pray and hope that Senators Manchin and Sinema stay true to their word and vote no on this, and if they do, we can avoid that.
Appreciate it. Well, I appreciate you indicating that Republicans, including you, would not support the debt ceiling and that measure as well.
Yeah. Well, you can count on that.
Appreciate that. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today. Good to be with you.
Holler at me again.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Final 30 minutes coming up.